Yeah, I think we're going to talk a little bit about Palantir. Sovereignty is running through, I think, every single thread in today's docket, but we are going to look at some very specific cases here.
Matt, maybe just double clicking on that for a second.
Yeah, do it.
Because, on one hand, I'd say I completely agree with you. Listen, let people trade, let business flow. It's the best way to create wealth for everybody. At the same time, we've seen a sometimes quite belligerent U.S. administration that have signaled that the kind of some of the old alliances are maybe not what they used to be, that some of the views around whether you can use some of these levers that are being had to put pressure on even on allies, that some things that would have been unthinkable in the past are maybe no longer unthinkable. How do you think kind of European citizens and politicians should react to that? I mean, what's kind of a reasonable response in that context? And you sort of take the extreme, right? There were fears at some point that Lockheed Martin, would be put under pressure from the U.S. Administration to click a kill switch that could disable the fleet of European fighter aircraft. I mean, that sort of thing in the extreme. How should we think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think control is important, right? And I think there are going to be beneficiaries of this dynamic. I think for example, Mistral, right? In France, I think that being where they are and setting up the infrastructure around them, getting away from the kind of the Cloud Act issue, there'll probably be a beneficiary of that. If you are a French bank or insurance company and you're concerned about your data, there will be inevitably beneficiaries from that dynamic you've described. But I think it just takes time for those companies to pop up and evolve.
Saw was it a company called, I think they were called Avendar, they're Dutch, and they've come out of some kind of Dutch government quango where they're starting. It's very early. So I think it was a 2 million seed round, but it looked very Palantir-ish. And I'm just wondering how many EU governments are going to push or support this kind of sovereign tech piece. They can't go up against Palantir anytime soon, but I thought that was quite an interesting angle. And obviously Mistral is probably the leading light in that bucket. Yeah. Well, let's go straight into Palantir, because this very, very neatly runs into the Palantir problem. Now, we've had a number of news reports this week about how MPs want the government to basically tear up the Palantir's £330 million NHS data contract and then give it to a British supplier. Obviously, there is no British supplier. Also, the 240 million from the MOD had no competitive tender. That was all waved through to NHS patient data. So Sadiq Khan blocked a 50 million Met deal on the side. Also, this week, seen the Dutch, Swiss, Germans, and a few other Europeans all working at how to pull Palantir from sensitive operations. So, coming on from the sovereignty piece that we were just talking about, what is the reality about the Palantir challenge specifically, and I guess the capability versus values piece? We've talked about this before, but Matt, can you tee up a little bit more for this, and then Matt, I'm going to come to you for some thoughts, if that's okay.
Yeah, so Anwura, who's an MP, I mean, she's kind of been championing this in the Commons, and I would say she's no lightweight. She's one of the few, if not the only, chartered engineer in the Commons. She's had 20 years in the telecoms industry. She's been building things. We should probably take her seriously in terms of some of the concerns she's raising. And I think the lock-in worry that she raises is legitimate, because this is not just about data and where the data sits, but it's also about, once you have an enterprise platform that's embedded in a large corporate organization, it's really hard to get out again. So I think some of these questions that are being raised, I think it's right to raise. Now, at the same time, she is a pro sort of innovation interventionist, and her instinct maybe is to reach for the state, whereas maybe we would say, look, are there free market approaches you could find instead? What is the federated data platform we're talking about here, and why does it work? So it's not one database. It's a system that sits on top of all the different trusts data, and then is used to create lots of digital twins of how hospitals run. And from everything we can tell, it really delivers for the NHS. It's enabled, cutting stays and producing more, better patient outcomes and more of the right things we want. So lots of good efficiency coming out of it. And the challenge we have is, everybody knows we need tech to make government more efficient. And some of us are old enough to remember the National Program for IT.
Yes.
So in the Blair years, there was this huge, mega billion-pound project to completely rebuild all technology for the NHS. And finally, in 2011, it was scrapped. And by then, £10 billion had been spent. And there was nothing to show for it. It had been an absolute failure. And so I think there's a concern that if we are saying, well, now what we need to do is to scrap Palantir, to buy a British thing that doesn't exist yet, all we're going to have is another national program for IT that will run into absolutely nothing. And so the question is whether there's a better way here.
Matt, I've got a very unfair question for you. If you're an MP sat in Parliament now, would you rip Palantir out?
I wouldn't rip them out, but I would be panicking about how we can get ourselves into a position where there is a swap out that you can do.
Yeah.
The problem is all of these things take time that we're talking about. So it's often this sort of like side by side comparison. But if you don't have some of these difficult conversations and make these difficult moves, then nothing changes. But I'm
always trying to work out.
It's just really hard not to end up in this just like adverse selection game.
Yes. Well, we talked last week about picking the B players because, we got something in whatever, France that we can use. It's not quite as good, but it's probably not the best angle. We've got to get the best tech doing the best job.
Yeah.
And it's obviously where that challenge is between this kind of whole values piece and is this a good company and has it got the same values in mind as our value set? It's just a really tough gig.
And I think having that doing the intellectually honest and truth-seeking side by side with these pieces of analysis and saying like, this is what we're sacrificing here in exchange for this, or this is what we're subsidizing here in exchange for this, as opposed to trying to treat these things as like comparable when they're not.
Yeah, totally. Mads, what else would you add?
No, I think the challenge with all of this is that two wrongs don't make a right. And so, we lumbered ourselves with rules and regulations and all the wrong stuff. And we've had a less dynamic, economy and a less dynamic tech sector. And so therefore, we don't have some of the companies we'd want. And then you sort of reach for some of these kind of maybe slight governmental overreach and try and regulate or legislate your way out of a problem you created 10 or 15 years ago. And that's probably not the place to start, right? I think it's probably much better to focus on how can we create an economy where we can build these technology champions, because that's really what we need. And there may not be a quick way to do that. I mean, maybe we'll just have to accept that it's Palantir for now and then ask what conditions do we need to put in place so that we can win the next one?
Yeah. But then, as we know, it's just really, really hard to rip out. But maybe they can do it in silos, and then there's an opportunity to not being one aggregated conglomerate platform. But we'll see. Okay.